Cameron F. is from Toronto, Canada. His home group is 12 Steps in 4 Hours group, and he will be speaking on step 4, resentments, for 45 minutes followed by 20 minutes Q&A. Cameron, it is an honor and a privilege having you with us, and we thank you for setting aside the time to share your life with us. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I never got that as an untreated alcoholic. It was a pleasure and an honor having you here today. My name is Cameron. I'm an alcoholic who doesn't drink or use, which is an odd thing for any of us to admit, because if you think about our step 1 experience, everything in it tells us we're going to drink and use or act out, depending on your addiction pattern, again. And so just to briefly qualify before I get into step 4, this is my 21st year of sobriety. I never really, I don't really get into the time too much because, I can say to someone, how much time you got? And they go, well, I got 20 years, but that doesn't tell me a lot other than you've been abstinent from alcohol, drugs, whatever, for 20 years. And I meet a lot of dry drunks, people that have been dry, but I don't know what they got in terms of emotional sobriety, but I certainly don't want it. I always find the most important question to ask is, are you working with newcomers? And if someone says, yeah, I'm working with newcomers, that tells me everything about their program. I drank morning, noon, and night from the age of 20 to 26 because I like drinking and I like using too, but I'll focus on alcohol. And I like it. I like it more than anything else on this planet, more than the jobs, more than my children, more than my wife, more than my own life. I risked liver disease and still couldn't stop drinking. And that's the horror of step 1. And the reason I want to go through this just very briefly is to qualify why we do a step 4 and eventually a step 5 as part of our process. Step 1 is the horrifying realization that I'm an alcoholic. I am powerless. I will drink again. And for me to drink again is to die. And there's nothing secular or human that'll stop that train wreck from happening. Yet as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's been 20 years since I've had any desire to drink, or when it pops up, I can easily control that desire. How is that possible? And it's because I met someone in the rooms armed with the facts about themselves, our common solution, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and a generosity of spirit. And they showed me a way out of that predicament. And as a result of that, I've rebuilt my life. I've rebuilt a marriage. My wife and I celebrate 34 years of marriage this year. The love and trust of my children. My daughter's 38. Actually, my daughter's coming over for dinner today. And my son, who's 40, who has a 13-year-old nonverbal autistic boy, and to be sober and part of his family and to deal with that, man, that's a blessing AA gives me day in and day out. My liver went back to normal after 6 years, and I travel all over the world speaking in AA and other fellowships about our big book solution. And it's a stellar life. I'm 67 years old. In my 50s, I went back to university and graduated in medical anthropologies and religions. And I just can't say enough about this miracle program called Alcoholics Anonymous. It does have a solution for those that are willing to work it, a way out. In 20 years, I've, through the 12 Steps, 4 Hours workshop, I've carried the message to some 13,000 people. We've taken 10,000 people through the steps since COVID started, thanks to this amazing platform called Zoom. I've personally worked with 450 through a 7 to 10 day process whereby we do all 12 steps in 7 to 10 days. Yes, you can do it quickly, and the results are there for those who are honest, willing, and open-minded to doing the work. And I buried 47. 47 are dead. I bury most people to alcohol death, 36 alcohol or overdose deaths, 9 suicides, and 2 were murdered. That seems to be the MO of the untreated alcoholic. I don't say that to brag about the numbers. I just have a lot of experience working with people in the steps, and I've learned a lot over those 20 years, and more is always being revealed. It's the program that keeps on giving. Every time I go through it with someone, I learn something new about myself, something new about the program, something new about newcomers. But the horrifying realization on step one is I got no power. But then I meet people in these rooms who are self-admitted alcoholics or addicts. They're just like me and I'm just like them, but they don't do it anymore. And I think, how is that possible? And they get my attention and they tell me, well, I found a power greater than myself. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, I found a great reality deep down within myself that when I connect to it, I can easily control my desire to drink, use, or act out. And I go, I'd like a piece of that action. And so that sets up step 3, where I make a decision to go a different way in life, to turn my will, my thinking, my thoughts, my over to the care of God as I understand it. Why do I do that? Because without that decision, the liar that lives in my head is running the show, and the liar always wins the argument. And, I succumb to the desire again, and I go out on another run. So I got to turn my thinking over. I got to fire that liar in my head and hire God. As I use God as a convenient noun. I'm really not sure what it is, whether it's higher consciousness, divine consciousness, God, whatever. And then my behavior is turned over to the care of God also. So I'm going to think and behave according to God's way of living in order to tap a power that lets me easily control that desire to drink, use, or act out. And that's the simplicity of our program. And we get a daily reprieve by applying spiritual principles to my affairs with my family, my children, when I'm in the rooms, when I'm at work with clients, to apply the principles of honesty and purity and unselfishness and love. That application of those principles allow me to access this power within me, this sixth sense, this intuitive knowing that lets me not only easily control my desire to drink, use, or act out, but to navigate that 3-ring crap show we call life at times. And that's pretty amazing. So I made this decision. We have that wonderful step 3 prayer. That's my daily baptism into the program, where every day I make a decision that, yes, I'm going to go God's way. And in doing so, I will be able to access a power just for today that allows me to control my desire to drink. But the first time I tried meditating, oh my God, what a cacophony of noise inside my head. Like all these yap voices going on, and all these fears and resentments and guilt and shame over the awful things that I've done is just creating such a racket in my head. I can't seem to connect to that power. So steps 4 and 5 is a process whereby we get right with ourselves. We want to figure out what's going on, what's blocking me from having a 2-way relationship with the one who has all the power. And we have 3 manifestations that we look at. We have our resentments, we have our fears, and we have harms done to others, including sex conduct. Although Bill in his instruction tends to lean heavily on his sex conduct, but he does specify that, we make a list of all people we've harmed. So we want to get right with ourselves. And, the first instruction is, step 4 says we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Now that's key. A lot of people turn step 4 into a psychological dig, an archaeological dig. There's got to be more shit down there somewhere, and they dig and they dig and they dig and they make this long drawn out psychological process. That's not what a step 4 is about. A step 4 is a moral inventory. Remember that AA's program, 12-step program, is a spiritual moral approach to the efficacy of alcoholism or addiction. So it's a moral inventory that we're going to examine. If we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. And the reason most people continue to always get what they've always got is they haven't got a clue what they've always been doing. And that's what we're going to figure out in step 4. Try saying that 3 times fast. So it says, next we launched out on a course of vigorous action. Don't let anyone fool you into thinking that means easy does it. As soon as I do a step 3 with somebody, I immediately launch into step 4. Most of the step 4s and 5s I do with prospect, at best, I give them a day or 2 to figure out their inventory, the big resentments, the big harms, the big fears. And then we spend about 2 hours looking at the big ones. When someone comes to me with an opus of 475 resentments, I just tell them, you're not that bloody important. And the other thing is, like, eventually they all get done, but what we want to figure out are the root causes, the root conditions to what blocks us from that power. So though our decision in step 3 is it's vital, it's crucial, it will have little permanent effect unless at once, there's that no half measures and let's do it now mentality, to face and get rid of what blocks us. Because, you know, our alcohol drinking or our behaviors, these are the symptoms of a much deeper problem, a spiritual moral problem, an overt sense of selfishness and self-centeredness that Bill lays out in step 3. So we want to take stock, and we're going to look at these 3 common manifestations. Today, we're just going to basically look at step 4, the resentment. So the first manifestation is resentment is the number one offender. Now, I don't know whether that's entirely true, because if you think about it, since the very first meeting that was started, which was by Clarence Snyder on May 16th, 1939, where the boys from Akron went out to them and had a huge fist fight with Clarence and the boys, all in Christian love, of course. From that inception AA meeting, we have spawned well over 300 different fellowships and millions of meetings, all based on a resentment and coffee pot. So I don't know if resentment really is the number one offender. Hitting aside, the reason I work on my resentments is when I'm resentful, I suffer the symptoms of my malady. I get restless, I get irritable, I get discontented, I get bored and depressed, and that activates that twist of thinking, that mental blank spot, that liar that says, hey, Cameron, we need our solution. And you got to remember, my solution for what ailed me in life was 26 years of alcoholism. And the liar, when it gets activated, it builds strength, and it comes up with a very compelling reason why I should pick up another drink, and out I go. So I cannot afford to indulge in the resentments that I have. I've got to work them out. So I'm going to share something with you. It's a brief matrix on resentment, a way of understanding resentment that I think you'll find very useful. So now, Bill posits in step 3 that our troubles are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. So what Bill is saying is we're responsible. We're the ones that are responsible. You know, in the United States in the 70s, there was a great American psychiatrist, Thomas Saz, who says there's no such thing as mental illness, just varying degrees of irresponsibility. Now, that really rubs one's nose in who's really creating what's going on in one's life. And irresponsibility is definitely one of the bigger character defects that most addicts have, most alcoholics have. So what does a responsible person look like? They're accountable, they're proactive, they're centered, they're leaders, they're functional, loving, independent, interdependent people. That's a pretty good eHarmony profile, don't you think? Now, when I am responsible for myself, when you think about it, when it comes to the way you think and the way you feel and the way you behave, and all humans work this way, I think, therefore I feel, therefore I behave, and thus I become. Who's really responsible? Well, I am. I'm responsible for my thought life and how I'm feeling as a result and the behavior that ensues afterwards. I'm responsible for my thoughts, my thinkings, my feelings, my emotions, my behaviors and actions. And then, and only then, when I'm in that position, can I be responsible to others, to be an effective sponsor, a mentor, a leader, teacher, parent, a spouse, employer, friend, partner, trusted servant. But that's not the way I play the game a lot, especially when I watch the news. I get irresponsible. I get unaccountable. I'm reactive. I'm uncentered. I play the victim. I get dysfunctional. I get fearful, and I get extremely codependent, with my battle cry being, I need you to change how you think, feel, and behave in order for me to feel okay about myself. And that's a lousy way to approach life. And I did that a lot during my alcoholic years. And instead of taking responsibility for my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, I blame you. for the way I think, feel, and behave. You made me think that. You hurt my feelings. You embarrassed me. You caused me to do that. And I give my power to you. And lack of power, that's our dilemma. And yet I'm giving it away. And because you think, feel, and behave in such a way that's unthinkable to me, I need to change you. And so I try to change how you think, feel, and behave by people pleasing, enabling, protecting, micromanaging, manipulation, over controlling, avoiding, martyring, uncommunicative, and bullying behaviors. You know, we can learn a lot from the Al-Anon and the Code of Fellowship, because I really believe codependence is the underpinning addiction to all our problems. You can be codependent on a substance like alcohol, codependent on a person, or codependent on a process like sex or love or fantasy or gambling or etc. And how do I know I've been irresponsible? Because when I'm irresponsible for myself or irresponsible to others, resentment is always the result. And that's key. And if you can wrap your head around this matrix, this is in the appendix of the workbook that I use when I teach 12 steps in 4 hours. You know, this matrix isn't in the big book, but Bill does allude to it a lot in that passage in setting up the step 3 proposition. And I've learned through my own character defects, irresponsibility is definitely one of my bigger problems. So I use that a lot for teasing out where I'm being irresponsible, especially when it comes to the news, because I get irresponsible towards the government. Oh my God, look what they're doing. They've got to stop doing that. And I scream and I yell and I upset my wife. And then I get, restless, irritable, discontented, bored, and my liar goes, screw this, Cameron. We need a bottle of bourbon right now. And that's no good. So it goes on to say it destroys more alcoholics than anything out, and from it stems all forms of spiritual disease, for we've not only been mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. Would you agree with that? Now, what I found fascinating about the big book, and I'm a big book advocate, I decided to think, well, what does Bill really mean about these character defects? So I went through the first 164 pages and looked for every character defect Bill mentions. And this is the list. Pride. Now, causes and conditions, defects of character, shortcomings, flaws in our makeup, the root of our troubles, bondage of self, they all mean the same thing. They all point to a character defect. Bill hated using the same words or phrases twice when he was writing the book. So that's why you see different phrases, but they all mean the same thing. And this is a list of all the character defects that Bill references throughout the 164 pages. Pride. And just make a mental note as I go through. Oh, yeah, I got that. I got that. I got that. Pride, vanity, egotistical, self-pity, morbidness, jealousy, envy, suspicion, selfishness, self-seeking, selfishly, unthinking, unjust, insincerity, dishonesty, lying, exaggeration, self-delusion, self-centeredness, self-justification, callousness, cruelty, anger, grudge, rancor, crankiness, bitterness, hate, antipathy, loathe, despise, overbearing, lethargy, impatience, fear, worry, cowardice, intolerance, lust, infidelity, inconsideration, antisocial, uncommunicative, slander, gossip, prejudice, criticism, ridicule, cynicism, diffidence, which means shyness, servility, groveling, scrapping, quarrelsome, irresponsibility, careless, unreasonableness, apathy, martyr, fanatical, squander, obstinacy, stubbornnness, and maudlin, self-pitying, tearfully sentimental emotions. I used to suffer that a lot too. And I thought, that's a pretty good list of character defects. And I go through that list to get people to start thinking in terms of character defects. And we're going to certainly tease them out when we do our resentments. So the great thing about step 4 is it gives us a promise when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. See, our addiction or our alcoholism goes deeper than the body. Otherwise, detox would have cured us. But we know it rests in our mind. But we know it goes deeper than our mind because otherwise the counselors, the therapists, and all that would have fixed us long ago. But it goes deeper than that. So Bill says we suffer a spiritual malady, an overt sense of selfishness, self-centeredness, where I want to run the whole show. And when people aren't doing what I like to do, I start suffering its symptoms. I get restless, irritable, discontented, bored, depressed. That activates the liar. That's the mental obsession, which leads to the first drink, and then I'm off on another spree, pursuing my love of alcoholism to the gates of insanity or death. But when we overcome the overt sense of selfish self-centeredness and practice life of being unselfish and helpful to others, I do not suffer the symptoms. I don't get restless. I don't get irritable. I don't get discontented. The liar goes into remission and my mind and body straightens out. That's the key with step 4. Now, it goes on to say, this is another passage that I like to use in step 4. We alcoholics are sensitive people. I get really sensitive. My character defects come out to play when I'm being overly sensitive. And it sometimes takes a long time for alcoholics to outgrow this serious handicap. So in dealing with resentments, now, I'm going to make a case for a 5-column inventory. There are lots of different approaches I've seen for doing step 4. This is the approach I've used for many years. I like this approach. It gets down to root causes and conditions. And I'm going to share with you, and I will make a case for it based on Big Book instructions. So I'm going to share the screen with you, and we're going to use Bill's example from the Big Book, where he outlines the first 3 columns on resentments. So basically in a resentment, we have column 1, the people, the institutions, or the principles with whom I'm angry at. Lots of people I was resentful at, institutions like the tax department, police forces, government in general. I had lots of resentments. And then I had principles that I was angry at, drug laws, laws trying to govern my behavior, censorship, etc. These were principles that I had a lot of resentment towards. So towards whom or what am I angry? And then in column 2, we figure out what's the cause. Why am I angry? And then column 3, how does this affect me? Is it my self-esteem, my security, my ambitions, my pocketbook, my money, relationships, including sex? Now, Bill just basically maps out those first 3 columns. And then, but he does go on to say, where am I at fault? Where am I to blame? What were my mistakes? And then they also ask the question, how can I set matters straight? So from here, I infer a 4th and 5th column. Now, when I was talking to Wally P., who wrote the book Back to Basics, I said, why didn't Bill map out 5 columns, or at least even 4 columns? And what Wally had to say is, in his interviewing of the early old timers when they were alive, he was an AA archivist in his earlier years. He said that the 4th column was always done orally. It was never really written down. I prefer to write them down, to put it in black and white, and I'll make a case as to why I do that. Now, often I've seen a lot of 4-column inventories, but very rarely do I see the 5th column, which is how can I set matters straight? Now, bearing in mind that we have a spiritual moral approach to the efficacy of alcoholism. So column 4 are my blocks, the character defects that are impediments to me having a connection with the divine consciousness, which can solve all my problems. And column 5 becomes the application of spiritual principles to access that power. And I'll show you how I work them out. So in Bill's example, he uses this person, Mr. Brown, which is a resentment. So why is he angry at Brown? Well, he put a lot of attention on his wife, Lois. He told Lois about the mistress Bill had, and Brown's after his job at the office. 3 big reasons that Bill is pissed off with Brown. Now, what is Brown threatening in Bill? Well, he's threatening his sex relations, both with his wife and mistress. His self-esteem's got to be affected. Around Brown, it must go to arrogance. Who the hell are you to be messing in my marriage? And around Lois, he's got to feel like a heel because he's cheating on her. His ambitions, domestically and business-wise, are being threatened. His pocketbook, his money, is being threatened domestically and business-wise. And his security, both domestically and business-wise, are being threatened. So what's Bill's part in this resentment? Well, first of all, he's angry. As soon as I'm angry, as soon as I'm resentful or irritated or whatever, I know I'm already blaming somebody. So that in itself is a character defect, the resentment, the anger. Now, Bill's also being dishonest here. He's cheating on his wife. So out of that comes 3 really big defects: dishonesty, infidelity, and lust. is false pride. Whenever self-esteem is threatened, it's always false pride. Now, false pride has two ways it can go. I can either exaggerate who I am and diminish you, whereby I get arrogant, or I diminish me in relation to you, and I go down the path of self-loathing, self-deprecation. The ultimate expression of arrogance is murder. The ultimate expression of self-loathing is suicide. But it's all part of false pride. And whenever my esteem is threatened, it's somewhere on that trajectory. It's all about Bill, so it's selfish. It's all about what Bill wants, so it's self-seeking. Jealousy and suspicion, jealousy around Brown and suspicion around Brown and his wife. He's being irresponsible because he blames Brown. And then under every resentment, there's an underpinning fear that drives the defects. Could be the fear of divorce, fear of losing his job, fear of not having enough sex. So I'll share an example with you in terms of my resentments. I had a lot of resentment towards institutional authority, especially cops. Now, why do I have this resentment, this hatred of police officers? Well, they're thugs for the state. They're corrupt. They're bigoted. They're biased. They're not there to serve and protect me. They are there to retaliate, punish me. They're liars. And, and these are the things that exacerbate my hatred, which is the character defect. What's being threatened? Well, cops threaten everything in my life, especially they can incarcerate me. They can even shoot me. So my relationships are threatened. My ambitions are threatened. My security is threatened. My self-esteem is being threatened. There are a lot of things going on that this institutional authority is affecting. So what's my part in it? Well, I'm angry and I'm resentful. Now, it's about me and what I'm not getting or should be getting. So I get irresponsible. I blame them. Now, my character defects are driven by a fear. And this will go to a fear inventory, which we can leave for another discussion. But the fear is the fear of institutional authority. And it exposes my selfish, self-seeking motive. Whenever you're working out a resentment, ask yourself, what's the self-seeking motive that binds my hands around their throat? Well, when it comes to institutional authority, what I want, my self-seeking motive, is freedom. I want to be able to do as I please. I want to express myself the way I like. I want to be able to do things without being, fettered by government intrusion. But then as I look at that self-seeking motive, I realize how futile, fatal, and destructive it is for me to hold on to it. Because when I ask the question, what's the likelihood institutional authority is going to move towards a more freer standpoint, freer society, it's not very likely. And I realize this is futile, fatal, and destructive. That's a key understanding of our resentment that can allow us to step back and free our hands from their throat. Because as long as my hands are around their throat, I get restless, irritable, discontented, bored, depressed, anxious, and that activates the liar, and a whole new world of trouble begins to open up. I also suffer, I'm irresponsible because I blame institutions for the woes of society. And even if they are responsible to some degree, it doesn't change anything by me blaming them. They are the politics of the weak, where I play the victim. And then I get into hatred, and I get into slander and vilification. And then I get into misanthropy, where I hate human beings. And it just continues to get uglier and uglier as these character defects pop out. Now, what should I do instead? And this is the answer. You see, column 4, as we say in step 3, relieve me of the bondage of self. Well, column 4 is the bondage of Cameron. This is the bondage of Bill we're looking at in Brown's inventory. And then, but it also says in step 3, may I do thy will always. Well, what is God's will for me? Column 5 illuminates God's will. So if the character defect is anger and resentment, I flip it into a spiritual principle. And my way through anger and resentment is acceptance. I have to accept that governments are going to continue to be intrusive and more tyrannical as things seem to be trending out. And through that acceptance, rather than resisting it, because then I resist, then I get resentful, and then I want revenge. And that's no good. So through acceptance, I can then move to a place of forgiveness where I realize they, like myself, are sick too. And eventually that pushes me into a world where I can be loving, unconditionally loving, lovingly detached. More importantly, it puts me in that position of neutrality, safe and protected, where I'm proactive, donning the mantle of God, and ask a much more important question, which is, how do I find freedom in an unfree world? And I start getting problem solving, and my intuition kicks in on how to solve baffling situations. And that puts me on a whole different course in life. With Bill, acceptance, forgiveness, and love. Honesty. He needs to get honest. He's been dishonest. Faithfulness to his wife, Lois. Intimacy. The opposite of lust is always intimacy. Lust is what I want. Intimacy is all about the other. Humility. To know thyself. To know one's I love doing inventories because I get humility. I know who I am. I know my strengths. I know my weaknesses. You know, my arrogance tells me I should be able to dust it up with a 30-something-year-old that pisses me off. But my humility tells me, as a 67-year-old man who hasn't had a fist fight since I was 25 years old, nothing good is going to come out of a dust up with a 30-something-year-old. That's humility, to know one's strengths and limitations, to be unselfish, to be helpful to others, to have trust in God, to be responsible for my thoughts, my feelings, behavior, so I can be responsible to others, to have faith in God's wisdom and power, and the courage to be the man I'm meant to be. And so now we have a track to run on. We understand what the bondage of self looks like. More importantly, we have a job description as to how we should apply certain principles throughout our day and all our affairs. And, you know, this is a paradox. You can't do an inventory unless you're living in column 5. The very fact that you sit down and introspectively look at your part in your resentments puts you in column 5, because you have to be honest to do it. You have to be humble to do it. Faith that God will forgive and give us the power to change us so we can have a profound alteration in our reaction to life. Everything in column 5 is going on when we do an inventory. That's why inventories are so powerful, and I do them on a regular, almost daily basis. Some days I just recognize the defect and let it go. But other days, if it gets under my skin, I get really pissed off. I start drawing columns and scraping them out like barnacles from a hull. And this is the magic of doing an inventory. This is a spiritual moral inventory on Mr. Brown that Bill has laid out. Now, I'm going to share with you the final result of my, actually, you know what? I'm going to close. Just going to stop that for a minute. I'm going to share with you my mucked up version of my inventory here. So this is what I uncovered when I did my inventory. Now, this is not only my resentments, but my fears and harms and all that sort of stuff, but they all pop up in the resentment process. But this is the purpose behind my column 4, is to figure out what the heck is going on with Cameron and what's blocking me from having an intimate two-way relationship with the one who's got all the power. So this is my inventory here. The left-hand side is the column 4, and which is no power, the bondage of self, and the right-hand side is God's will steps. And this will also factor in these spiritual principles that we illuminate here, will factor in when we do our steps 8 and 9. So who am I as an untreated alcoholic? Well, I suffer false pride and arrogance. I get bigoted, misogynistic, and I'm rude to others, and I'm full of distrust and suspicion. Now, envy and coveting aren't my defects. I don't suffer that. But I suffer selfishness and self-seeking, especially when I'm being codependent, my need for validation, center of attention, recognition. And when I don't get it, I get pretty pissy. I'm dishonest, I lie, I exaggerate. I'm lustful, hateful, resentful. I procrastinate. I'm impatient. I uncovered a number of fears in my resentments: the fears of being invisible, the fears of being forgotten, fear of not being worthy, fear of institutional authority, fear of no control. And I get irresponsible, and I blame, and I enable, and I martyr others. I have vulgar talk, immoral thinking, and gossip and slander. And then I added some things that I had, like sarcasm, cynicism, epicaricacy, the Germans call Schadenfreude, is taking pleasure in another person's misfortune. It's a nasty defect. It seems to be all over YouTube. I think YouTube primarily exacerbates this particular defect. Misanthropy, where I hate human beings, prejudice, unfair biases, and indiscretion. And this is my resume as an untreated alcoholic addict. But in understanding those defects, I reveal where the power is. There's no power in column 4, but there's power in column 5: humility, respectfulness, courtesy, politeness, trust, contentment, gratitude, unselfishness, being helpful to others. You know, what I do instead, I give it away. I validate others. I recognize others. I make others the center of attention. To be honest, integral, make restitution when required, tolerant, accepting, tactful, generous, intimate, faithful, forgiving and loving, to be active and prompt, to be patient, to have faith in God's power and God's wisdom, and the courage to be the man I'm meant to be in column 5. To be responsible, accountable, purity, kindness, praise the good in others, levity, wisdom, empathy, compassion, devotion to humanity, fairness, just, and discretion. And kind of ironically, I've done step 5 here with you. This is what I look for in the step 5, as a confession of moral shortcomings and spiritual principles whereby I need to change and have a profound alteration in my reaction to life. And here's a final paradox I'll share with you. God hires people with the worst resumes to do his work. That's pretty paradoxical. And that is how we do a spiritual moral inventory, where I recognize what I've always been doing, which is creating what I've always been getting, and looking at what do I need to do differently to do God's will. And in the application of those spiritual principles, I tap a power that lets me easily control my desire to drink, use, or act out, and thus recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And I'm for that. How about you? God bless. Let's open it up.
Thank you, Ressa. I'm Mel. I'm an alcoholic. So let's see some hands. That was an incredible talk, Cameron. Thank you. We'll start with Zara. Could you put your camera on, please, and then come in with your question? Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I thought my camera was on. Thank you, Mel, and thank you, Cameron. I'm Zara. And thank you so much again, Cameron, for a deep dive in resentments. I have a handful of questions. I'll try to shorten it up. Okay, so what does forgiveness mean for you? And how does forgiveness look like? And how to forgive people, especially when it's like their behavior is like sometimes it's so hard to forgive people, right? So how to do that? So yeah, hopefully it makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so in doing my inventory on a resentment, whether it be a sexual resentment or some harm done to me, you know, when I do the column 2 on them and all the reasons I'm angry at them, it's almost like being in a house of mirrors. Because as much as I'm trying to take their inventory, I'm really seeing, well, I'm like that too. I've done that. I've done that. I've done that. And so it helps me in that approach to they, like myself, are sick too, and kind of helps me reframe some pity and some tolerance and some patience. Now, the first step in forgiveness is to accept. I have to accept this, because when I'm not accepting, I resist it. And then I get resentful, and then I want revenge. And that puts me on a whole other trajectory in life. So in this process of looking where they are sick like myself, helps me to move to that position of forgiveness. Now, forgiveness does not excuse what they have done to us. There are consequences for all of us on what we do, but it frees our hands from their throat. I let go. And it's healthy to let go. The reason I don't want to let go is because I don't want to accept. And I resist letting go. And I keep my hands around the throat. But why do I got to let go? Because if I'm doing God's will, which is my decision in step 3, I must move to a position of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. Otherwise, I suffer the symptoms of being selfish and self-seeking. I get resentful. That resentfulness creates the discontentedness, the boredom, depression, the restlessness, and that activates the liar. And then I end up drinking. And I do not want to drink ever again. It would be awful, if not a death sentence. So that's kind of the trajectory. Now, I know it's easier said than done, especially if someone was molested or raped. There's a great clip. I don't know whether we have how much time are we sharing for here?
You've got time to show us a clip if you like.
Let me share a clip with you on forgiveness. I play this in the workshop, and I find it very powerful. And it's from the movie The Shack, where a man whose daughter has been taken by someone, raped, molested, and murdered. And he's being led on this spiritual journey by a shaman trying to find some way through it. And the shaman introduces him to the concept of forgiveness. And here's the clip.
He killed my daughter. I want to hurt him. I want him to hurt like he hurt me. I want you to hurt him.
I know you do. But he too is my son, and I want to redeem him.
Redeem him. He should burn in hell.
So we're back to you as the judge.
So you just let him get away with it.
Nobody gets away with anything. Everything bears consequences.
What he did
was horrible. I'm not asking you to excuse what he did. I'm asking you to trust me, to do what's right, and to know what's best.
And then what?
Forgiveness doesn't establish your relationship. It's just about letting go of his throat. Mac, the pain inside is devouring you, robbing you of joy and crippling your capacity to love.
I can't.
You're not stuck because you can't. You're stuck because you won't. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here with you.
I don't know how.
Just say it out loud.
I forgive.
Mackenzie, you're such a joy.
You know, it's a little artistic license, but in the beginning of the movie where his daughter disappears, she has a backpack with a ladybug on it. That's the last thing you see of this little girl. So it was kind of poetic and artistic license the way he captures the ladybug in his expression of letting go, of letting this ladybug fly away. It's an interesting movie, but that's one of my favorite scenes in it, illustrating forgiveness. Someone mentioned, could you please explain what you said around 400 odd resentments as opposed to the main core resentments? I go after the big resentments, you know, the primary ones: mom, dad, siblings, ex-lovers, partners, etc. Because in unraveling those inventories, you'll discover 95 to 99% of the common character defect. Those character defects I shared with you, they crop up in all of my resentments. So after I've done a certain number of big ones, I begin to see the pattern of what character defects are most problematic for me. And that's what I work on in terms of the application of the spiritual principles. That's why I don't think it's important to be thorough. So if I have a resentment that pops up from a childhood that's really bugging me in the day, where the heck did that come from? And there's a resentment there, I'll sit down and I'll work it out on paper. But I can generally see the same character defects pop out, but I can resolve it quickly. That's why I focus on the big resentments. If I think of somebody and I want to cut them up and put them in the freezer, that person should be on my resentment list. If I think of someone that I wince in guilt and shame and remorse over what I did to them, that's someone who should be on my harms list. And through those two areas, I can tease out the underpinning fears that go on. Zara, does that answer all your questions?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That was great questions and great answers too. Andy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name's Andy. I'm an alcoholic. Yeah. I actually asked I was going to ask the same question as you've already just answered, so that's why I put my hand down.
Okay.
I will ask one, but thank you everyone that's done service. Cameron, you know, you just mentioned about, you talked about several lists about harms, resentments and fears. I don't know if I've been, because I am your war and peace guy for resentments, that's for sure. Several pens are needed to do mine. For the bits where you just said about the guilt and shame, those would be on your harms list. Do you split them out from that and not include them on the resentments list, or not?
Well, often they go hand in hand. Usually a resentment I have usually ends up in a harm because I've been pretty vile with the person I'm pissed off with. So, and as a result, I've unjustifiably aroused certain things in them. So it'll end up on both lists, a resentment and on the harm list. And you bring up another thing. One of the things I really recommend is you do a resentment on yourself and then flip it into a harms inventory, and you'll find that a really eye-opening experience. I always encourage people to do a resentment on themselves and then how that factors as a harm too, where you see how you harm yourself, how your troubles are basically of your own making.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Cameron. Yes.
Great, thank you. I've just got one come through the chat and then I'll come back to Mario. What does acceptance look like for you, Cameron?
Well, acceptance requires me to be extremely honest at the situation, to accept it. Like I've come to accept, I live in Canada, and without trying to drag an outside issue in, I feel I'm under extreme oppression, both socially and financially, by the government powers, both at the municipal, provincial, and federal level. And it pisses me off to no end. And I get really angry and my mind goes to murderous thoughts and things I want to do. And I get restless and irritable. And then I get the efforts and I start thinking on a different course. And that's no good. So acceptance is, I live in a country and this is the way it is. I have to accept it. Now I'm hopeful that later on down the road, there will be other people running for election that might change the tide of the way things going. But the way things are going right now, this is the tide. And by accepting, I can let go of my resistance and my resentment and my need for revenge and get to my center, to be centered, to be a centered man where I'm proacting. How do I find freedom in an unfree world? Well, I hire a CPA that works with me on my finances. I'm mindful of how I spend money. I'm mindful of how I invest. So I navigate my experience in Canada from a center of proactiveness. And that I find diminishes my resentments, diminishes my rancor, and allows me to find the joy and freedom, despite the fact that I live, in my opinion, an oppressive country. And that's, but it's through acceptance, the realization, this is the reality. And I'm 67 years old. I've come to accept I'm 67 years old. That brings a whole reality to it. I'm not 35 anymore, right? So acceptance requires rigorous honesty and assessment as to where I am at. And that's power, as opposed to the delusion, the lie that I'm something I'm not, or the world around me shouldn't be this way, and I play the victim and get extremely dysfunctional.
Great answer. Thank you very much, Cameron. Mario, please come on in with your question.
Hi, my name is Mario. I'm an alcoholic, an addict, and so many other things. And thank you very much, Cameron. That was amazing. It remind me when the first time I did a fourth step, I was writing, and after like 4 paragraphs, I wrote back what I had written, and it was all excuses of the behavior I was engaging in. They were all excuses because I was molested, because I was raped, because no one took care of me, stuff like that. And the resentment was towards a person, but I had no idea how to deal with it. And I remember that very clearly. I knew that there was something wrong when I was blaming other people. And then I went to different sponsors because I would get very confrontational when the sponsor would say, "And what was your part in it?" And I'm like, "You motherfucker, I was 11 years old. Why are you talking?" Stuff like that. So it would sidetrack me completely. And later on, I was able to forgive, and I had no idea how to. But as time goes by, and I started reading your 4-hour 12 steps, everything started to become clear. One of your sponsees is my sponsor, and now I'm sponsoring, and I get confrontational people who, if I try to, help them, if I try to pry a little bit to help them bring out, they get very confrontational, and I understand that. I just wanted to make a comment. Is there? I mean, I would think that you don't deal with those kinds of problems anymore, or you know how to deal with them. I really don't know. That's my question.
That's a good question, Mario. I'll use your own example. If you were molested or raped as an 11-year-old boy, childhood traumas like that, I am not the properly appointed authority to uncover and unravel childhood trauma. I would defer that discussion to a therapist who's designed to regress into those childhood memories, bring them out, and resolve them in a therapeutic manner. However, as a sponsor, I would talk to you. How old are you, Mario? Are we gonna unmute? Okay, so I would talk to you about this inventory, not to the 11-year-old boy, but to the 55-year-old man. What's your part in this situation as a 55-year-old adult, and handle it from a spiritual, moral side of things? That's my role as the sponsor, uncovering the moral inventory. And sometimes it takes 2 to see 1. When you're working with someone, a good sponsor, you'll be doing inventory. The inventory will be shared with you, and you'll go, the one that I get most common left off the list is irresponsibility. And I go, well, have you thought about how irresponsible you are? So a sponsor will sometimes see the defect in the other where it's a blind spot. So sometimes it takes 2 to see 1. That's why, when we pair up and we do an inventory, it's a pretty magical process. But that's the distinction I would make. The childhood stuff we unravel with the properly appointed authority, like a therapist or a counselor or a psychologist. But I deal with people as they are now. I'm talking to the adult here and now, and what's my part in that resentment. Hope that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you. Lauren, would you like to come with your question?
Yeah, please. Thank you, guys. My name's Lauren. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks very much, Cameron, for your share this evening. I just got a question on new resentments while you're in recovery when they crop up. So something I've been trying lately is applying the sick man prayer, and I'm struggling with something. So I'll tell you basically, and let me see what you come back with. So, as you're saying, please help me show this person the same love, tolerance, and pity I would chiefly grant a sick friend. I have no problem with that because that makes me a good person, and I feel like, right, this is what I want to be. This is what I'm aiming for. The next words I do. How can I be helpful? I don't want to be helpful to somebody that's hurt still. And I just wondered, have you ever come across that yourself? Have you got any pointers on how to get around that, or even go as far as a reason why I could be maybe having issues with that part of the sick man prayer? Thank you.
Well, the question of how can I be helpful, it's a complicated answer. Sometimes with someone who's doing harm to me, I just show them a world without me in it. And they've got their life. You're free to live your life as it is, but that doesn't mean I have to share oxygen with you. And sometimes that's the most helpful thing, because for those of you that may be a member of CODA or Al-Anon, every time we connect with a toxic relationship, that's a qualifier that exacerbates the character defects. And that's not healthy for me or the other one who might be privy to my reaction to that. Does that make sense? So, but the question of being helpful, I remember one person came up to me in the rooms and says, Cameron, I hate your gut, but I'm really messed up. Would you work with me? Of course I'll work with you. That's being helpful. I get some of the most intense people. Everyone I get is either going to jail or just getting out of jail. I never get to pick the people I want to work with. Otherwise, I'd pick a big-breasted sex addict with a history of relapse. That's a terrible joke. But I don't get God just puts what I need to work with. Like, I hate cops. Well, I don't anymore. Do you know how many cops God puts in my life to work with? It drives me crazy. So whatever I'm fearing or angry towards, it raises its manifestation. I was getting really wound up about one of the, I'll just share it with you because, I'm no saint and I work on it. I can get really wound up about the blacks and the Muslims. And I got a lot of fear going on there. I do a lot of fear inventory. And I was ranting and raving about the problems. 3 days later, I get a call from this fellow in Los Angeles. It says, Cameron, I'm a crackhead. I'm 58 years old. Can you work with me? Sure. I set up a Zoom channel. He shows up, black man. And I go, excuse me, but what religion are you? And he goes, I'm Muslim. That's how God screws with me. And he bashes humility and honesty and everything else into me. And I have these incredible spiritual experiences, and I learn love and tolerance and pity and acceptance, etc. That's the power of this program, and requires me to be helpful.
Great, thank you. I think we've just got time for one more that's come through the chat. How do you prevent new resentments from building up as you continue your recovery journey?
Wow. Well, I still murder people in my head 3-4 times a day. Like I said, I'm no saint. Oh boy. But I do have tools. I have tools. First of all, I cleave to my faith. I cleave to my faith that there's a real power there, because my liar's always going, there's no such thing as God. That's not real. That's make believe. I have to cleave to my faith. That's why I come to the rooms when I meet people like myself, like you, who are still sober, and God doing for you what you can't do for yourself. It reinforces my faith, which reinforces my desire to do the work, which yields the promises, and then in turn reinforces my faith. So I cleave to my faith. The faith motivates me to do the work. So when life isn't going my way, and I'm pissy about it and the way governments are going, step 3, I'm here to do God's will, not Cameron's will. Cameron Inc. is out of business. I'm in the God Inc. business now. If I got resentments, I got the disciplines of 4 and 5 to work that out. If I've harmed people, I got the disciplines of 8 and 9. If I need greater conscious contact with the divine power deep within, I have the disciplines of my step 3 prayer, my step 7 prayer, step 11 prayers and meditation to forge that connection. And when I'm being overtly selfish and self-seeking, and it's all about Cameron as the center of the universe, I have step 12 where I give unconditionally to those that suffer. And that's not easy. In 20 years of working with others, I've been lied to, I've been robbed, I've been verbally abused, physically threatened, sexually harassed, my property's been damaged, my wife and children terrorized. Like, these are awful people. But God keeps smashing. Your job's to be helpful. And every now and then I see a miracle. I'll share one miracle. I was in Spain in 2015, and I worked with this guy. Asked me, how do you work the program? And I sat with him on the steps between my involvement in this convention. And I explained him over about 45 minutes the nature of how our step work works. And he thanked me, and I didn't hear from him. Then in 2020, I get an email and it says, "Hi, Cameron, this is Maury. You probably don't remember me, but you took time out to work with me and to share with me how the steps work. And I just want you to know, I'm 5 years sober today." Busts me up every time. Even when I tell the story, it busts me up. And when I have that kind of connection and a sense of how I was helpful, all I have in my heart is love. I have no resentment right now because I've been centered in trying to be helpful. Even when I think about my government leaders or people I've come to really loathe, right now, if I think about them, I'm neutral. I neither hate nor I'm in that neutrality. And that's why I work the program the way I do, to stay in that centeredness. So I'm not reacting, I'm proacting. And my heart fills with love, unconditional love, that loving detachment, which allows me to navigate life in a much more effective way and to be of maximum service to God and my fellow human beings. Gee, I wish we had
Amazing.
more time, but that went by fast.
I have just got one more question that's come through the chat. I think we can fit that one in. What behavior pattern of yours tends to destroy relationships?
Oh, wow. Well,
I think we're really throwing you under the bus tonight, aren't we, Cameron?
Yeah, no, it always comes down to fear. It's always my fears. My fear of not being worthy, my fear of not being good enough, my fear of institutional authority, my fear of not being valid or being unknown. These fears drive my character defects. So if I can, and I'm a big fan of fear inventory. When I come back to do fears, we'll have some fun with that because it's really illuminating doing fear inventories. And and that causes me again to go back to the principle, cleave to my faith in God and its power and its wisdom, and asking God for the strength and courage to be the man I meant to be, and to trust that. I know nothing good comes out of my anger and resentment, but so much comes out of acceptance, forgiveness, and love. And the more I do it, and the more I experience it, the more faith I have and the courage to be that kind of man. And ideally, over the years, I hope to make spiritual progress.
That's awesome. And that brings us to the end of the Q&A. Thank you very much for everyone who participated.